Coming up on Locked On Dodgers, the Dodgers had an off day on Monday, so we are answering your questions from our mailbag. We've got a lot of questions about what the Dodgers' plans are for the pitching staff at the trade deadline. We got some questions about the Hall of Fame and retired numbers, some stuff about some stat nerdery, and several other questions. So let's get Locked On Dodgers.
You are Locked On Dodgers, your daily Los Angeles Dodgers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, Dodger fans, this is Locked On Dodgers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you for making Locked On Dodgers your first listen every weekday morning. Remember, this show is free and available on all podcast platforms and on YouTube simply by searching for Locked On Dodgers. Or even better, go ahead and subscribe wherever you're watching or listening right now, and then you'll never miss a day because you know we're not going to. If this is your first time listening or watching, my name is Jeff Snider. That's my co-host, Vince Samperio. We invited Freddie Freeman to be on the show, but he didn't respond to us. And I view not responding to unsolicited Twitter messages as a sign of emotional instability. So it's just going to be me and Vince today because we're real men. Vince and I are both lifelong Dodger fans, just like you are. We've also spent time covering the Dodgers in the press box and the locker room. So we've seen Dylan Hernandez's ugly face in person. Sorry, Dylan. No, I'm not. So we're not quite insiders, but we bring you the smart fans perspective on our boys in blue every weekday morning. So let's talk about the Dodgers. We're not going to talk about Dylan Hernandez. We already did. Point made. Shut up, Dylan. But we've got a lot of good questions from our awesome listeners today, Vince. I don't even know where to start. We got a lot about the pitching and kind of the Dodgers' plan for the pitching. Maybe we got to start there somewhere.
Yeah, definitely with the pitching, especially on the back of the first real rumor we've gotten so far in the month of July with John Rossi basically just saying the Dodgers have had conversations about Louise Castillo with the Reds. And, there's no real reason to read too much into that. I'm sure the Dodgers have had discussions with multiple teams about multiple players. This just happens to be the one. As we know, with free agency and with trade rumor season, the Dodgers will get mentioned a lot for leverage reasons, whether it's teams wanting to think the Dodgers are interested in this player or in the offseason, free agents wanting to think Dodgers are interested in their player. But other than that, there's a whole big conversation about pitching. You got questions about, outside of Frankie Montas and Luis Castillo, are there any other starting pitchers worth acquiring? With Heaney, May, Canely, Trinan, and Duffy coming in the second half, do the Dodgers need to trade for a pitcher? Question about Dustin May, which we seem to get almost every mailbag at this point with, is he going to be a starter, strictly used in the bullpen? And then, just another question about Kershaw, Buehler, Gonsolin, and Julio as the 4 in the playoffs. How does that compare to the last couple of years? So, yeah, Jeff, with all that being said, and I guess another question, would you rather acquire another reliever or starter before the deadline? So with all those questions in mind, I believe there's a very easy discussion to have. And, I'll throw it back to you.
Yeah, it's a lot there. The problem I see, and this kind of answers several of the questions, is all of those guys, Heaney, May, Canely, Trinan, Duffy, coming in the second half, as our buddy Jim at Ewok in LA mentioned. Very few of those guys are expected before the trade deadline. And so that's the challenge the Dodgers are facing. Do you put your hope in hoping that at least 3 or 4 of those 5 guys actually come back and are effective? Or, and that doesn't even mention Buehler on that list. Buehler's another guy who won't be back until later in the second half after the trade deadline. And we have no idea what we're going to get from Buehler. And so it seems like the Dodgers might have to go after a starter and a reliever simply because you don't know what you're going to get from those guys. And worst case scenario, you end up with too many good pitchers, which, as I said on a radio interview today, is kind of like having too much money or being too good looking. 2 things I know very much about. But it's not quite that simple, because having too many pitchers, these guys who you might be bringing in are guys you have to give up prospect capital for. And so it's a balancing act that Andrew Friedman does not have to do this. Andrew Friedman has to walk that tightrope of figuring out, doing his best guess of what are we going to have coming back internally, because that also doesn't mention Bobby Miller. Bobby Miller very easily could be a bullpen piece in, later this season and even into October if they're looking for that. A lot of different options, and they're going to have to weigh those. We do know Andrew Friedman said the other day that he hates trading for relievers at the trade deadline because the cost is so high. And so it wouldn't shock me if the Dodgers just didn't go after a reliever, just went after a starter, if they can get that for the right price and trust that some of these guys coming back are going to work out. It's a risky game, though,
Yeah, and seeing that quote just made me nervously laugh, because even though at the time it didn't seem like it cost a lot, when Andrew Friedman is traded for relievers, O'Neal Cruz is out there hitting laser beams, and Yordan Alvarez is out there being an MVP candidate. So those two guys were traded for relievers, not necessarily the way we would think about it, but they were traded for relievers.
And it totally would have been worth it if the Dodgers won the World Series in 2017 and 2018.
Yeah.
That's the price you pay, and it's worth it. If the Dodgers had won the World Series in the early 90s, they would have said, well, that's what Delano DeShields got you. And so it was worth giving up Pedro Martinez for. But when you don't win the World Series, and only one team can win the World Series every year.
Yeah. But when it comes down to pitching, and I put this out on Twitter earlier, and realistically, going after a good pitcher is going to help you out. If you're going after a good starting pitcher, it helps out, bumps everyone down a notch. If you go after a good reliever, okay, that bumps everyone else out. And what the Dodgers have to weigh, and the good thing is, I think last year was really the only time where the Dodgers had to make a move, or they weren't. They didn't even win the division, even though they got Max Scherzer and Trey Turner. I think last year was the first year where they weren't desperate to make a move, but they had to make a move in order to really have a fighting chance in October, just because based on all the injuries and everything that happened. I think, this year and years past, they don't have to make a move. They could benefit from making a move, but they don't have to, which is why I think, guys like Louise Castillo or Frankie Montas, Dodgers won't realistically get them unless other teams start balking at prices, and the price just happens to drop because, when you're trading with teams, you can get outbid very easily. And we've seen the Dodgers get outbid, numbers wise, money wise, or prospect wise before for other guys or whatever the case was. So where they're sitting at is kind of sitting in and seeing what happens to them, and kind of seeing not kind of where the crumbs fall, but kind of, where the bigger pieces of crumbs are falling, and kind of play off that. So I think whatever they do, if it's not Luis Castillo or Frankie Montas, I don't think it's worth trading for a starting pitcher unless you're just giving up, filler, in terms of prospects. When it comes to a reliever, I don't even think a high-end reliever is worth it. It's, a guy like Tony Cingrani or even Tony Watson back in the day, even though that turned out to be a little bit different. You go for guys like that you see something in that are a step above. They're not going to get DFA'd, but you see something in that you think you can change and have it work out. Because like I said, if all these guys do come back, or if you get a starting pitcher that's, top notch, Buehler, May, whoever, they don't have to stretch out. They can take their time coming back and focus on, maybe 2 innings max. And now you got a bullpen with Dustin May and Walker Buehler, along with all the other guys that have been pitching so good so far this season. And you're pushing guys like, Bickford and Vesia to the brink of not being on the team, which, sucks for them, but it's good for the Dodgers.
Yeah, if your postseason rotation is Kershaw and Julio and Luis Castillo and Tony Gonsolin, and then you've got Tyler Anderson and Walker Buehler and Dustin May, who can give you 2 or 3 innings out of the bullpen, then it's kind of ridiculous. So yeah, one great acquisition really could do that. And one of the things kind of under the radar, maybe this kind of answers the question we had from Ruben at Ruben Chavira. He asked about Hanser Alberto. I'm interested to see what the Dodgers do along the fringes at the trade deadline, because if the Dodgers, along with Luis Castillo, also got either Brandon Drury or Donovan Solano or somebody like that, that says, hey, sorry, Hanser, it's been fun. Thanks for the hang loose sign, but go on your merry way now. And Andrew Friedman is going to surprise us with some names we didn't expect, but I also think he's going to go hard after Luis Castillo.
Yeah, and that Hamzer question will lend itself a little bit into the Muncie question coming up. But before that, I'll let you read some ads.
Yeah. Let's talk about Built Bar for a minute. Have you tried the coconut brownie chunk Built Puffs yet? You've probably had the coconut brownie chunk Built Bar if you've listened to us long enough, because I've told you how good that is. It's my wife's favorite. I like it very much, even though I don't like coconut. It's not. I think it's mostly the texture of coconut that I don't like, and this doesn't have the texture of coconut. But it's got the flavor, and it's so good. Well, they've taken all that deliciousness and put it into a chocolate covered marshmallow, what they call the Built Puffs, and remarkably still healthy. They are all good for you despite being delicious. They're low calorie, low sugar, high protein. And did I mention delicious? They're delicious. So if you like the coconut brownie chunk Built Bar, you should try the coconut brownie chunk Built Puff. They're here for a limited time. They're probably going to go fast, so you should order them now so you don't miss it. Whatever you decide to order, whether it's Built Puffs or Built Bars, go to built.com and use promo code LOCK15 and you will get 15% off your order. That's promo code LOCK15 for 15% off at built.com. All right, we are back. And Vince, since you threw us a nice little segue, why don't you read us some Max Muncy question or two?
Yeah, we got a couple questions on Max Muncy, not necessarily related directly, other than they're about Muncie, but we'll go with one that directly ties to the Alberto question, and that's about Max Muncy. Actually, you had this question, but it's basically Max Muncy being on the playoff roster. And if he continues to struggle the way he does, will he be on the playoff roster?
Yeah, and Muncy's option is $13 million, and that is a lot of money, but for what Max Muncy is, basically, I do think it is basically guaranteed that the Dodgers are going to pick up Muncy's option next year. I think Muncy is too good, has too much potential, and would have another offseason, if it is elbow related, have another offseason to recover. And I think there's way too much potential for a team like the Dodgers who uh, wipe their behinds with $13 million bills, uh, for them to let money be a deciding factor like that. I think Muncie will be back next year. And the postseason roster question is a little bit more interesting. Um, they would have to acquire somebody who is being on the roster instead of him, because Muncie is still, despite not having a very high batting average and not hitting enough home runs, he's still getting on base a lot. He's almost a league average hitter this year, despite being terrible by his standards. When you factor everything together, and I do expect him. I still think he's going to figure it out, at least somewhat, as the second half of the season goes on. I think by October he's going to be a little bit closer to what we expect. Maybe not full Max Muncy, but I don't really see anybody coming in who would really displace him, and especially his spot on the roster. I could see if they did get a guy like Brandon Drury, maybe Muncie getting more days off, in more of a platoon situation or something. But Muncie off the bench is always going to have that power potential and everything, that I think they're going to want him on the roster in the postseason, unless he actually gets worse in the second half.
Yeah, I did forget to ask a question from Brandon Johnson, where he did ask about the Dodgers the option for next year, which is what you talked about first. But when it comes to the playoff roster, like you mentioned, it's either the Dodgers, acquire someone, because even if Max Muncy is not in the starting lineup in the postseason, realistically, he's still warrant a roster spot, like you just mentioned, for the reasons of having a power bat and being able to play multiple positions and all that. You look at, I'm just laughing. I pulled up Fangraphs before this, and Evan Phillips is leading the Dodgers in WRC plus with a 359 WRC plus this year. He had one plate appearance. I didn't even realize that. But beyond that, I mean, Jake Lamb could be a guy that could fill a role over Max Muncy and be that guy, or Lamb and Trace Thompson fill that outfield role. Keep Lux at second, and Justin Turner can be DH, and you're kind of moving guys around, whatever the case is. But as it sits, I mean, especially now that they're opening up the division lead, Max Muncy's leash got even longer than it was before, because they'll be able to give him the time. And I think Muncy's had more success since he's come off the injury or off the IL, but it's also been a different type of success. He hasn't been walking as much. His walk rate was around 22, 23%, I believe, before he went on the IL. He was leading the league. It dropped. I don't know what it's at right now, but I know it's 17.7%. So, yeah, it's dropped a lot, and he's not leading the league in that anymore. And while it has led to a couple more home runs here and there, a little bit more power and some doubles and stuff, it's also a matter of he's getting away from what he is. And if he's not going to be completely tearing the cover off the ball, I think he's going to find that medium where he gets back to taking a little bit more pitches. But he's also, I think, just trying to find his swing and be comfortable at swinging at certain pitches and being able to say, hey, I know what I'm looking for now. And I know if I get, even if I get a dead red fastball, but I'm looking, in a different spot, he can be comfortable taking those pitches. So, yeah, there's a lot there, but I think realistically he's going to be on the roster, and they're definitely going to pick up his option.
Yeah, and I think Muncie and Kimbrel are kind of in the same boat in that the Dodgers are a better team with a good version of both of those guys, and so they are going to get a pretty long leash to see if they can figure it out, and that's good because I do think they both will figure it out, at least to some extent, enough to be contributors in October. Our next question, let's go to our buddy at FLP3 on Twitter. He asked our thoughts on the Dodgers' longstanding Hall of Fame only policy on jersey retirement. Jim Gilliam is the only exception, and he's kind of a borderline Hall of Famer and a longtime coach who died while actively a Dodgers coach, and so there's the sentimental value there. I think this was probably spurred because the Mets just retired Keith Hernandez's number, and there are at least a few guys, probably Fernando and Hershiser and Garvey at least, who had at least as much value and impact on the Dodgers as Keith Hernandez did on the Mets. And so I think that's probably what brought up this question. And we've talked about it before, but it's been a while. And I don't know. Maybe we've changed our ideas. Or what do you think, Vince?
Yeah, and it's one of those where this is probably why the Dodgers haven't, made really that change, is because you start getting, I mean, it's not a bad reason to be on a slippery slope, but it's a little bit of that slippery slope because, you do open it up to more numbers being retired, and then maybe some of the shine of having your number retired wears off a little bit if you lower the bar just a little bit to their impact on the actual Dodgers rather than their impact, Hall of Fame wise. And, Fernando's that first one that comes to mind. And, maybe it's one of those to where the unofficial retiring is the way they go about it, and that's the way they get away with it, because like I said, that would be the one that opens up the door. And it's not like the Dodgers don't want to honor all these players and stuff like that, but it's just a matter of, if they're a team with a lot of history, teams like Yankees, teams like Red Sox, Dodgers, Cubs, they got a lot of players, numbers start getting retired, and then, it's a matter of, okay, well, when does it stop? And, that's kind of where they're at now. When it comes to Piazza, realistically, they've had someone wearing his number while he had it. That person's gone. I think they've had a couple people wear it since then. In the last couple of years, I think at least one person's worn
Jock
it.
Peterson and Max Scherzer.
Yeah, well, after Scherzer left on that, but yeah. So it's a matter of, unless something happens between them, I don't think that he gets retired until maybe after he passes, unfortunately, which would be kind of weird in general. Plus, he didn't go in as a Dodger, and I don't know. There was just a lot there, but yeah, I think they should just start retiring numbers, and at least with Fernando, Hershiser specifically, you don't lose like very crazy well-known numbers, so you're still kind of in the clear.
Yeah, the problem is you have to draw the line somewhere. The Yankees retired Paul O'Neill's number, which is kind of the Dodgers equivalent of retiring Andre Ethier's number. In fact, Ethier is probably more deserving with the Dodgers than O'Neill was with the Yankees. And for me, the line is somewhere above Andre Ethier. If we get to the point where Andre Ethier's number is retired, I feel like we've gone too far. And like you said, the Dodgers have a lot of history, and Don Newcomb and a bunch of those guys who contributed to the Dodgers winning 4 World Series in 9 years back in the 50s and 60s. a lot of those guys, their numbers would have been retired by a lot of teams. But, and then you've got, if you retire Steve Garvey, how do you not retire Davey Lopes and Ron Say and Bill Russell, and there's got to be a line somewhere. And so I definitely don't want them retiring as many as the Yankees have. And so I don't totally hate having the line where it is, but I think they could at least make an exception for Fernando because it's retired anyway, and nobody's going to complain. Nobody's going to say, "Oh, if you retired Fernando, then you got to retire whoever," because Fernando is so unique to Dodgers history, still a part of the organization. I'd say retire that one, and then maybe over time you soften up a little bit and occasionally retire somebody. But I don't think it's that big a deal. I don't think Don Newcomb's number needs to be retired for people to understand what Don Newcomb meant to the team,
Yeah. And I think just the kind of what Dodge said, me being, or we both gone to a lot of stadiums, and I think, a little Hall of Fame just adds to that and helps out with, honoring all these guys, but not necessarily the ultimate honor.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, we've got a few more questions, including one that came in a text message and one that came in an email. So that's fun. So thank you for making Locked On Dodgers your first listen every day, and please keep it Locked On Dodgers. And now I would like to talk to you about rockauto.com. If you own a car or truck and you ever need auto parts, do not go to the auto parts store. That's a terrible idea. It's gross there and you pay too much money. You know what's not gross? Your house, where your internet is, and know where you don't pay too much money? rockauto.com. A couple real world examples from my life. I saved about $1,000 on new struts for my Chevy Suburban. I saved, instead of paying $49.99 for a new door handle for my Ford Fusion, I paid $8.16. As you'll notice in both of those examples, I saved money. Do you like saving money? You should, because saving money is the opposite of spending money. So if you want to save money, go to rockauto.com. If you don't believe me, go there right now and put in your make and model of car or truck, and you'll see, holy crap, they've got everything I could ever possibly need. You might say they have all the parts my car will ever need. That's why it's their slogan. So go there right now. And if you do buy something, write Locked On in there, "How did you hear about us?" box, so they will know that we sent you. Amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. rockauto.com. All right. What else do we have here in our Twitter inbox? Vince, do we have anything else there before we jump to our email and text message questions?
Yeah, so reading over, we did kind of not answer some of the questions when we talked about all the pitching stuff. One of them that I liked from B Home says was, how does Kershaw, Buehler, Gonsolin, and Julio foursome compared to the last couple of years heading into the playoffs? And then I think that was the only one. Or if Kimbrel continues to struggle down the stretch, this one's from @ChampCityLA. Kimbrel continues to struggle, bullpen by committee, or would you like to see one person getting majority of the save opportunities?
Oh, I actually hadn't seen that one. Yeah, I'm always in favor, unless you have an established closer, I'm always in favor of playing the matchups, because the ninth inning isn't always the hardest inning. I know people say the ninth inning is different, but sometimes the ninth inning is the sixth, seventh, and eighth hitters, and that's not as hard as the second, third, and fourth hitters. And so, Evan Phillips has the stuff to be that dude. Yancy Almonte has the stuff to be that dude. Bruce Gratterall at times has that stuff. But Alex Vesia even. But if the opposing team has three lefties coming up in the ninth inning, I'd rather have Alex Vesia than Bruce Gratterall on the mound. And so I'd much rather play the matchups if they don't have an established closer.
Yeah, I'd agree there. And even like I said, they're gonna have to play where they play it, and realistically, we talked about this with Gratterall last week, and sometimes Gratterall would work in the closer position just because that ninth inning is a clean inning where you don't have to do too much. When it comes into comparing these guys into the past, it's always going to be tough. You don't know exactly. If Gonsolin continues the way he's been, then I think this might be one of the better rotations they've ever had going into a postseason, because you have a legit 1 through 4. 2020, they had that legit 1 through 4. Even though they didn't let Dustin May kind of spread his wings that postseason. So I think this would be probably, with Kershaw pitching the way he is, Gonsolin pitching the way he is, Julio pitching the way he is, and Buehler can come back, then that would be one of the stronger foursomes they've had probably ever in this run of postseason appearances.
Yeah, if Buehler is right, for sure. Next question. It's from our text messages, and I'm going to read it and then I'm going to answer it because it required some research, and I did that research. This is from Zach, who is from here in Utah, like I am. He says, "Hey guys, I've listened to your podcast for a couple months now. I was watching the game the other day, and the phrase runner in scoring position stood out to me. Not because it was new or unique, but because I wonder if a runner really does score more frequently from second base than from first base nowadays. It seems like with the long ball, the percentages might be a little more even. Is there a way to look this up? Go Dodgers." Thanks, Zach. I definitely agree with your go Dodgers at the end. And yes, there is a way to look it up. There's a few ways I thought of about going about this. Did I freeze up, Vince, or no? I did. Okay, but now I'm back. All right, so I don't know where I froze up. Unmute and tell me where I froze up.
You finished the question.
Okay. Yeah. So there was a few different ways that I thought of to go about this. And the way I ended up doing it is I looked at the splits. Basically, you look at when there's just a runner on first base, how many runs score in that situation, because that's, that guy and a home. If there's a home run, obviously the home run counts too. And then I looked at just a runner on second base. So basically, when there's only one runner on, how many more runs does the team score when it's a guy on second versus a guy on first? And then I compared that to in the middle of the 80s. And so I did this worth of data, and with the run, uh, 8.91% of
You're cutting out a
their
lot.
plate appearances. So 50. Am I really?
Yeah.
Sorry, guys. Hopefully this will get better. There have been 51,714 plate appearances with the runner just on first base in the last year and a half. And teams have scored 4,607 runs in that situation. So that's 8.91%. Compared to second base only, it's 22,993 plate appearances and 4,119 runs, which is 17.91%. So basically, teams are about twice as likely to score or score twice as many runs with the runner on second as they do with the runner on first. And then I compared that to 1985. I just picked a random mid 80s year. I like 1985 because the Dodgers were a good team. And the runner on second number was almost exactly the same in 1985. 17.91% this year, and last year 17.66% in 1985. The runner on first number was quite a bit lower in 1985. These days it's 8.91%. It was only 7.15% in 1985. That is the impact of the home run. And so basically the short answer to Zach's question is yes, the numbers have gotten closer, but not anywhere near close. You're still twice as likely to score from second as you are from first. So that runners in scoring position thing, that still works.
Yeah, there you go. That's a good thing to know. I'll answer one more of those other questions from earlier about any other starting pitchers worth acquiring. I don't think so, unless somebody, unless Pablo Lopez or somebody becomes available to a certain extent. I think that would be the only other way. And then we'll go to touch on this one real quick from LA fan at EZAV11. Says, will Dino Ebo pitch to Pujols in this year's home run derby at Dodger Stadium as he did in the 2015 All-Star game? So far, what we learned on Tuesday is Albert Pujols will be in the home run derby, Juan Soto, Ronald Acuna Jr., and Pete Alonso. Pretty strong foursome there, although Pujols is more of a legacy than actually think has a chance to win. He might ask Dino Ebo. Dino Ebo I'm sure, will already be in LA, but who knows? And then I think the only other question, although we had the question from email from Tom. He says he had a question about the draft coming up. Looks like the Dodgers don't have a first-round draft pick this year. I know they lost the pick for signing Freddie, but what about the pick they get for losing Corey? Also, how is it determined and which team gets a competitive balance round A pick? Because he noticed the D-backs, Rockies, and Padres all got one of those.
Yeah, so competitive balance picks are based on small markets and small revenue teams. And so basically crappy teams get those picks. The Dodgers are never going to get a competitive balanced pick unless they trade for one. Those are the only draft picks that are allowed to be traded right now in Major League Baseball. The Dodgers, because they had the second best record in baseball last year, they would be the second to last pick of every round, except because their competitive balance tax number was so high, their first pick drops 10 spots. So instead of picking, well, they would have been 29th, except the Mets get a compensation pick at number 11 because they didn't sign their first pick last year, Kumar Rocker, sorry. So the Dodgers would have been the 30th pick, but because of the competitive balance tax, they dropped down to 40. So their first pick will be the 40th overall pick, which ends up being the first pick in the second round, right after the first competitive balance round. That's where the Dodgers' first pick will come. Then they would have had a compensation pick at 76, except the compensation pick they would have had for the Rangers signing Corey Seager, except the Dodgers then lose that pick because they signed Freddie Freeman. Oh, and the Dodgers don't have an actual second round pick because of signing Freddie Freeman. They lost their Freddie Freeman pick and their compensation pick because they signed Freddie Freeman. So their first pick that's technically in the second round is really their first round pick. Then they don't get a second round pick, and then they don't get their compensation pick at 76. So their second pick is just the second to last pick of the third round. And that's the 105th pick overall. And then from then on, they are just the second to last pick of every round. So they'll be at 135 and then at 165 and then at 195, basically every 30 picks after that throughout the rest of the draft. But that's why the Dodgers do only have, 3 picks in the first 5 rounds of the draft.
Yeah, that's different for the Dodgers. The very good part is that they have already a farm system that's ranked near the top, and they've been known to hit in the later rounds anyways.
Yeah, they are pretty good at drafting low and somehow turning them into great players anyway. So
yeah, the last question we had was on PitchCom, asking if to kind of say everything we know about PitchCom from Doug Reynolds at CRCL 805. If you've been watching the games and how the broadcasts, the PitchCom is what pitchers and catchers are using in order to relay signs, and some coaches as well. The catcher can have it. Most guys are putting it on their knee guard now, but some guys had it on the wrist early on. You push the couple buttons, it tells the pitch, location. You can decide what voice is giving the commands, which is helpful if you have pitchers that don't speak English. And then, other than that, I don't know if you have anything else. And I know you had put out an ask to see if there was anything else out there.
Yeah, somebody had asked about, because the Dodgers didn't use PitchCom in games for the first little while of this season, a couple months, I feel like. And then they did start using it. I reached out to a guy I know who was involved with the Dodgers in a coaching capacity, and he was very evasive in his answer, which led me to believe that whatever the Dodgers are doing, they don't want to talk about it. And that kind of makes sense. The Dodgers, I don't know if they have some secret sauce when it comes to PitchCom, or if it's just it's kind of our standard policy to keep things close to the vest. But basically what you see on TV is what anybody knows, or at least what anybody's saying. And they still don't use it as much as other teams. You still see them giving signs. Sometimes they'll only use it with a guy on second base. Sometimes, I think it varies by pitcher. I wonder if Jerry Hairston was pitching, would he make it say cambio since he doesn't know the word changeup? Anyway, yeah, it seems to be working when they do use it. And I noticed, like, in this Cubs series at Dodger Stadium, several times the Cubs pitchers like having to hold their hand up to their ear because they couldn't hear the PitchCom. And it's kind of like an NFL stadium where you crowd noise can actually help. And so all you anti-wave people, hey, maybe it's helping, huh?
You can make noise without the wave.
That's probably true. I think that does it for us, right?
Yeah. We tried to touch on everything. If we didn't, go ahead and ask us again and we'll get to it.
Yeah. We weirdly have an off day on Sunday and then, the All-Star break. And so, we'll have plenty of time for your questions if we missed anything. So feel free to reach out. Thank you for making Locked On Dodgers your first listen every day. Now, for your second listen, check out Locked On MLB Prospects. Host Lindsey Crosby is a prospect encyclopedia, and he's going deep on the MLB stars of tomorrow. It's free and available wherever you get podcasts. If you're not watching or listening to Locked On Dodgers every day, we'd love if you add 1 or 2 days a month to your rotation. If you have friends and family who love the Dodgers as much as you do, please tell them about the show. Maybe they'll like it. You can follow us on Instagram and on Twitter at Locked On Dodgers. Vince is on Twitter at Vince Samperio. I am on Twitter at Snydog, and the DMs are open in all of those places. Our email address is lockedondodgers@gmail.com, and our phone number for voicemails or text messages is 323-863-LOCK 5625. We are here every weekday morning, and we hope you'll be here with us. When you get in your car or sit on your couch, tell your smart device to play podcast Locked On Dodgers. And remember, you don't have to agree, you just have to listen. We'll talk to you tomorrow.
Have a good one.